All right, so my name is Jeff Kirkpatrick. This is my presentation for the final project of the Criminal Justice Capstone Project. Just to give a quick background on myself, I live in Medford, Oregon, which is in very southern, kind of southwest Oregon. I'm a patrol sergeant with a agency that has about 100 officers, and I've been so employed for about 15 years. Um, this is likely my last presentation and probably last assignment as a Herzing University student before graduating next week or in a couple weeks. So without further ado, here we go. The title of this presentation is Heroism Interlaced with Lessons in Watertown, Massachusetts. So I really do want it to be noted that this entire incident, in my eyes, is a study in extraordinary determination and heroism across multidisciplines, not just one discipline, not just law enforcement, but multidisciplines. And I don't want to stand on a soapbox and kind of hammer the mistakes that were made, specifically in Watertown on April 19th, which is what I'm going to focus on. I wanted to first and foremost note that by and large, the police officers and police administration did an outstanding job in this incident. Um, I know that there are many others in our class that are police officers as well, and most of you are, or some of you will be watching this. And as a profession, we as policemen can be very bad about taking criticism. However, we have to be humble and we have to force ourselves to learn not only from our mistakes, but the mistakes of others as well. Uh, this doesn't mean to second guess anyone's actions in that day, but rather is more an observation and an acknowledgement of things that could be improved on. So there are three main points that I want to touch on and discuss in this presentation. First will be I want to adjust the use of force response by officers on Laurel Street on the evening of their early morning, of April 19th of 2013, where officers first came into contact with the Tsarnaev brothers. Secondly, I want to touch on the command and control structure that was unable to adequately handle the influx of officers that responded. Some of them self-deployed to the staging area during the manhunt that followed the Laurel Street gunfight. And then lastly, I want to acknowledge the advent of sympathetic fire that occurred once Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was located in a boat on Franklin Street later on April 19th, and then discuss the need to train this out of our officers. So starting with the Laurel Street incident, we know that the Tsarnaev brothers were tracked in a car that was carjacked by GPS. The GPS was used to track this SUV to the city of Watertown late on the night of April 18th, early on the 19th. The city of Watertown is a small agency. It had about 5 officers working that night. And what ensued on the streets there was kind of a scene rivaling a Marine firefight in the streets of Fallujah. That officers located the car, and before a hasty plan could be put into place, the Tsarnaevs attacked. And after a lengthy gunfight that must have felt like an eternity, Tamerlan Tsarnaev was tackled to the ground, and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev got in the stolen SUV, made a U-turn, and drove back through the scene. And that's kind of what you can see laid behind the graphics here, is kind of an overview of what that scene looked like. Now, the use of deadly force against Dzhokhar Tsarnaev as he fled through this scene and the officers firing at the vehicle as it fled through the scene was, in most views, a reasonable decision. And the manner in which it was applied resulted in a friendly fire situation. They weren't able to determine who fired that shot, and I would kind of argue that this is probably a good thing due to the emotional detriment that it would cause not only to the officer who fired the round, but also to the agency that that officer belonged to. And that'd be a very tough thing to get over. However, as noted in the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency's after-action review of the incident, the lack of officers being unaware of their backdrop during this probable justified use of force is a need for training. So there needs to be there needed to be a little bit of training implemented in the in target acquisition. So After Dzhokhar Tsarnaev escaped and Tamerlan Tsarnaev was identified via fingerprints, a massive manhunt ensued in Watertown. Uh, with that operation came an emotional response from law enforcement all over the region. Their city had been attacked, and a police officer was killed, and one of the suspects who did it was outstanding and confined to a very small area, or relatively very small area, so that they believed. Nearly 2,500 officers self-deployed to Watertown, Massachusetts on April 19th from varying agencies, not only in that area, but from outside areas as well. So the command post was set up in a local mall parking lot and was not in the command post itself, and the command structure was not prepared for the influx of officers that was going to happen there. Not only was there not a command structure in place to deal with the extra personnel and a way to effectively deploy them to the field, but there was no infrastructure to deal with providing these officers with basic needs such as food and water. Um, Now, while it's totally understandable that why the officers responded, the confusion that it caused resulted in kind of an environment in which the officers had no command, with no command structure. They self-deployed into the cordoned off area to assist in the manhunt during the shelter in place. So as policemen, we rely on a chain of command structure and information-led missions in order to create kind of a purpose-driven action. We don't go out there blind. That's what makes us different. We have systems in place. Some people speculate that the reason that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was not captured during that shelter-in-place request was that there was a lack of structure in place. So kind of going back to that, after the after-action debrief identifies um, those problems, the problems with the command structure, is one of the possible solutions um, for that is not only the turning away of unneeded resource, but also a, definitive command structure with one overall commander. One such system that was identified and offered is the one that's offered by FEMA, which is in the form of the ICS, or the Incident Command System, or the NIMS, National Incident Management System, which are online programs that can be taught to officers and command staff. So moving on to the capture at 67 Franklin Street, after the shelter-in-place request was lifted on the evening of April 19th, a 911 call was received from 67 Franklin Street telling the police that a subject was inside of a covered boat and that he was bleeding. The police kind of descended on that scene, hundreds of them, and I can't second guess or criticize this response, and I probably would have run there if I could myself. However, after the boat was surrounded, shots rang out, followed by more shots in a hail of gunfire that didn't stop until a supervisor had to call for a ceasefire. As it turns out, and hindsight's always 20/20, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was unarmed, and the initial shot was fired from an officer perceiving a threat from the boat. The initial shot is explainable. That officer can probably answer for his actions, thinking that he saw something that was a threat. However, the barrage of gunfire that followed is a cause for a concern. Um, I don't want to understate the risks and the pressure that those officers on scene faced that day. I wasn't there. I've been in similar situations and I can understand it. But identifying the contagious fire that happened that day calls for someone taking responsibility for it and fixing it to prevent future similar situations. A barrage of gunfire struck like surrounding homes and even had a long-lasting effect on some of the residents that live in the area, causing some emotional stress that went on for years to come. So we know that contagious gunfire or reflexive fire, sympathetic fire, whatever you want to call it, is a frequently occurring event in police use of force and military combat. It occurs when an emotionally charged event, in an emotionally charged event, one person fires and others nearby fire, not based on a known threat, but rather on the fact that the person nearby had fired. So that can be trained out. The sympathetic fire can be trained out of people, and it's something that needs to be trained out of our police culture. Each officer is going to have to answer for why they reasonably believe that their use of force was justified in their minds and at that time, and why they used it. one explanation, your explanation can't be that I fired because everyone else was doing it. Um, that's not only a possible criminal act at that point, but a black eye in the face of the rest of the law enforcement community. So that sympathetic fire has to be trained out and has to be addressed in training. So I know that when faults are pointed out, people are quick to defend themselves against perceived personal attacks, and I want to be really clear that the only people really to blame in this incident are the two suspects and their actions. They're responsible for what happened here. Without their evil and criminal acts, the rest of this event doesn't even occur, and we're not having this conversation, and we're talking about some other incident when we present this project. However, it did occur. And we need to look for ways to improve as a profession, even if it's a hard pill to swallow. So we we become stagnant in our growth, and in an ever-increasing anti-law enforcement society, we have to hold ourselves accountable. Um, there are fixes to the mistakes that were made in Watertown, Massachusetts, and I think that by and large the police response and the heroism far outweighed any of the mistakes that were made. But there were mistakes made, and those things can be learned from. Um, some of those things that can be implemented and have that were suggested to be implemented were the implementation of an ICS or a NIMS, a National Incident Management System, for the command structure in order to better manage the large influx of people that came to the scene that day. Um, and along with an improved use of force and weapons training to try to avoid a couple of the mishaps that happened. One on Laurel Street with Officer Donahue being hit, and then another with the sympathetic fire reaction at the boat on Franklin Street. So, kind of in conclusion, and I'm going to move to the reference page and then kind of speak while I'm on the reference page. I just want to thank all of you watching, the instructors, for my time here at Herzing. And like I said, this is mostly my, or most likely my last assignment before graduation. So I wish all of you the best in your future endeavors. Please feel free to contact me if you ever need anything from the Southern Oregon area. Thank you again, and good luck to the rest of my classmates with your presentations. Thank you.